Hello, and welcome to today's HDI webinar. We're excited that you're joining us for AI Means Business, a panel discussion on modernizing knowledge management. I'm Megan Selva, Director of Content and Training for HDI, and I have a few housekeeping announcements before we begin. If you experience any technical problems, please refresh your browser, and we encourage you to ask questions at any time during our discussion by clicking on the Q&A tab in your BrightTalk window. We'll answer as many questions as we can during today's discussion. Finally, thank you to Ivy.ai for sponsoring today's event. And remember, you can connect with HDI on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn anytime for news about upcoming events and resources. Before we get started with our discussion, I'm going to open up our first poll, and it's a pretty simple question. Does your company have an overall AI strategy? You can answer yes, no, or maybe. I'm going to start the poll now. It'll be up for about a minute. Again, you're going to click on the vote tab beneath your video window there, and I'll let you know when you have about 10 seconds left. While you consider your response, I'd like to introduce today's panelists. Doug Tedder is the principal of Tedder Consulting, a service management and IT governance consultancy. A recognized thought leader whose passion is helping and inspiring good IT organizations to become great, Doug is an author, blogger, and frequent speaker and contributor at local industry user group meetings, webinars, and national conventions. He holds numerous industry certifications in disciplines ranging from ITIL, Lean IT, DevOps, KCS, Verisym, and organizational change management. Doug's a member and former president of ITSMF USA, a longtime member of the HDI community, an HDI business associate, a contributing author to Verisym, and co-author of the Verisym Pocket Guide. Chris Payne manages the quality assurance, training, and knowledge management teams in the UITS Support Center for Indiana University and previously managed the UITS IT training program for more than 15 years. With more than 30 years of experience spanning instructional design, training development, and teaching, Chris acquired extensive skills in leadership, team building, and financial and project management. He continues to teach as an adjunct faculty member for the O'Neill School of Public and Environmental Affairs at Indiana University. Mary Frances Coryell is the Vice President of Business Development and Partnerships at Ivy.ai, the leading provider of AI chatbots for higher education. She's played a critical role in launching ed tech startups and healthcare solutions, including Ivy.ai, where her more than 20 years of experience leading sales organizations has contributed to accelerated and sustained growth. Mary Frances's affinity for innovation and early adoption of new technology connects stakeholders with insights in a way that consistently delivers enterprise-wide solutions that support key objectives. And with that, I'm going to start wrapping up our poll. And it looks like about 12% of our audience have an overall AI strategy, about 56% don't, and about 31% aren't sure. So as we look ahead to the discussion, which is about modernizing knowledge management by leveraging AI and automation, what is or should be the role of knowledge management in today's support organizations? Doug, do you want to start off?
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I look at knowledge management as probably one of the most underutilized service management practices within many organizations. And the thing that knowledge management should be doing with organizations is capturing that wisdom that is already present in many organizations. It really is what I would call a glue process from a service management perspective. It helps us overcome obstacles that we may have with respect to, what knowledge do we have? Who knows what we know? So knowledge management is one of those things that really is underutilized in many organizations.
Sorry, were you wanting me to go next, Megan?
If you want, did you guys want to follow up on what?
Sure. Sorry. I certainly agree with what Doug said. It's really important in a university organization, but I think in any organization, for there to be kind of a gold standard of knowledge, if you will. You have people in any large organization who are subject matter experts on a topic, and if you can capture their knowledge and share it out from a single canonical source of information, then everybody is getting the correct information about those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would support that, Megan, and add on to that as organizations continue to grow and whether they're teams are growing or their individual departments and silos are growing, often what ends up happening there is knowledge is not only growing, but the places we store that knowledge continues to grow. So a strategy and cohesion around that knowledge management to enable a transfer of the knowledge is really key to growing and sustaining within the organization.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good transition too, when you talk about sort of the growth of the database and the store of information. What is the current state of AI or automation-enabled solutions for knowledge management that support organizations might take advantage of?
We definitely see at this point in time, as we think across service organizations, that the state they are in is truly in an adoption state. They're evaluating across their organizations to really assess their current structures, and then to assess from the sake of the culture of their audience. So as we think about audiences of today, whether they are in Chris's, case students, but he's also dealing with faculty and staff. Other organizations are facing patients or other types of clients, whether they are 18 or whether they are 55 or 75. There's a market demand and an expectation today of omni-channel, on-demand, 24/7, 365 access to information. So across service organizations, we truly see them in this adoption space of trying to navigate and assess their processes to say, where does AI fit for us? What is, the first place we want to start in regards to a strategy? So definitely an adoption.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Chris, you guys have had quite a bit of success with automation and knowledge management. So how would you say if your organization's ready for automation AI? What defines readiness? How did you know?
Well, I think we had a long history at Indiana University of doing knowledge management, at least in the IT realm. We have an award-winning knowledge base that we developed in-house early on in the days of the internet, like in the 90s. And at that time, the manager of the support center, the team that had the knowledge base, is Sue Workman, who's currently the CIO at Case Western. So she was able to advocate up into leadership. And I think as more and more people got to see the advantage of the knowledge-centered approach, it really just became more widely adopted. So now it serves out APIs so that the content there can be served out to different websites, different endpoints, and things like that. So I think, it's kind of a chicken and egg question. I wouldn't say there was one magic moment where the entire culture was ready for it, but because we have a long history of it, people more and more grew to see how incredibly useful it is.
Mm-hmm. Now, Doug, you see a lot of support organizations from different industries. What would you, in your experience, say constitutes readiness to sort of take that next step with your support organization?
Yeah, I think when organizations get to a point where the pain of trying to rediscover knowledge is starting to outweigh, the other work that they're doing. They do so much work, and then only to realize, well, if you just asked me, I'd known that. Well, if you had just written it down, I would have known that you known. And so I think that's where the tipping point is. Quite frankly, a lot of organizations that I've worked with, they get by just fine, thank you very much, without a formal knowledge base, or so they think. And it really starts to become a challenge when we are really reliant on those experts that are sitting on one side of the desk and they know everything about everything. But to the point when that pain of trying to rediscover those things that we already know starts to outweigh everything else, then it's a good time to start to have that conversation around a formalized approach to knowledge management.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, we'll come back to technology in more detail later, but Mary Frances, in terms of knowing when you're technically ready to do it, I think there's something tempting in saying, I have to do this next thing and this next thing, and kind of setting up technical obstacles for yourself. Is there a point at which you just rip the technical Band-Aid off and you say, I'm just going to go for it? What do you guys see with your clients?
Yeah, and that actually is right in line, Megan, with the previous question. And another place of, being ready, whether we're talking about the technical piece or the strategic piece. We definitely saw in the last year with COVID that the Band-Aid had to get ripped off. You know, a number of folks had said for years, we want to move in this direction. We want to make ourselves be more nimble and give ourselves more opportunity. All of a sudden, their teams don't report to the same call center every day, or they don't all have a face-to-face channel with their audience. So for sure, that Band-Aid was quickly ripped off, maybe not by their own doing, but yes. And from a technical standpoint, and we'll talk more about this in our conversation, I know a little bit later, to say, you know, at some point you do have to jump off the cliff. Nothing will be perfect, and actually jumping off the cliff is what ultimately drives you in that direction of becoming more perfect. So yes, sometimes it's a matter of just setting the strategy and saying, next Tuesday, we're taking a step off the cliff.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We heard that a lot from our advisory boards last year, that it suddenly became so much easier to talk CIOs around and talk IT leaders into automation or things they'd been putting off, because it's amazing what you're willing to do when you don't really have a choice.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. So Chris, you touched on the notion of, you know, the culture, the importance of having that culture around knowledge. I definitely want to get us discussing, you know, what are the hallmarks of a rock solid knowledge culture? Why is having one so important to any knowledge management initiative?
Well, I think it's critical that you have organizational buy-in, not just from the leadership level, but also kind of at the more operational level. That people all see the value in it, that people all see it as part of an organizational strategy, and is essential. You know, as Doug said, if you don't have something like this, then you're just hunting around for documentation. A lot of times you're reinventing the wheel and finding some sort of half-patched piece of information that didn't actually come from the people who knew the best. So I think you know, it really needs to be something that's believed in at all levels. That is the hallmark of an organization, I think, that really believes in knowledge management.
Doug, do you want to build on that?
Yeah, you know, the thing I would add to it, and I agree with everything Chris said, you know, you have to have that right culture in place. But the thing that we often run into, or as things that I see, is that, you know, sharing knowledge is a voluntary action. No one can make you share your knowledge, right? There's folks within organizations that like to hoard their knowledge, and as a result, the overall organization suffers. And so when you can start to get those folks that maybe are resistant to sharing knowledge and starting to see the benefit of sharing their knowledge, it frees them up to do other work, right? The whole team gets better. It raises the profile of the organization as a learning organization. When you start to see those kinds of things, I think that's when you can say, hey, I've got the right culture in place. We're thinking about this in the right way. It's not about what do I know, it's about what do we know collectively.
I would just add to what Doug said. I absolutely agree with what he just said, but I think it also tends to snowball. You know, once like one or two teams that were very resistant start to come across, then other teams that were a little less resistant are like, hey, well, if they can do it, you know, we certainly can. And it really starts to build momentum.
Mm-hmm. And Mary Frances, I expect you guys see, you know, clients at all different points on the spectrum of maturity with knowledge management, their knowledge culture. You know, what what would you say are the hallmarks of maybe someone who's earlier in the maturity stage, later? You know, what are the things you guys look for when you're working with clients?
Squarely, as Chris and Doug were just touching on, it starts with the people. So we can create, you know, a phenomenal piece of technology, a phenomenal system to manage all the knowledge. But if the people aren't embracing that culture, you know, it really doesn't matter what the technology looks like. It truly begins with the people. So at that, often the core is around helping people understand the value in a golden source of truth. You know, we all work from a single golden source of truth, and then really looking at that with through a strategic lens. It is part of a strategic initiative, and that there's a life cycle approach to it. So often that's a big challenge we see across organizations where naturally, internally, they're organized by departments or, areas that own certain sectors of the life cycle. And yet their end users touch all those things. So beginning to, help folks see where weaving that together can increase their call to action times, can increase their service times. That is a huge, huge benefit.
Mm-hmm. So we've established it's important, but what happens if you don't have one? I mean, obviously you can pull off knowledge management without a knowledge culture, but you'll be better off in the long run if you have one. So what if you don't have some? I'd like to get your feedback on best practices for developing one, or maybe if you have one and you think it's a little bit lackluster, how do you then turn it around? So Mary Frances, I don't know if you want to start there.
Yeah, sure. I think really, as we talked about, from the sake of having the strategy, moving your culture in that direction, but then we can all talk about that and agree to that all day long and shake our heads yes and say that's where we are. But if you've not made it easy for your teams to capture and share that knowledge as like a byproduct of their day-to-day work, if it becomes something that is in addition or is outside or is complex, it's not going to happen. So really folding that in to be a byproduct of their day-to-day tasks and activities is truly crucial.
Mm-hmm. Chris, do you want to follow up on that one?
Sure. I was going to say at IU, we've actually got a dedicated knowledge management team. And I think that helps to just to address the point Mary Frances was just making, because if I'm the subject matter expert of a system, I need to write up the documentation and make sure that it makes sense, but I'm going to hand it off to a team of professional writers, professional content managers, and things like that, who will ensure that it fits in the content ecosystem. There's not redundant information. There's not conflicting information. Things are written in a consistent, clear way. And then I, as the service owner, don't really have to think about it too hard. I write up the documentation. It doesn't have to be perfect English. They're going to take care of it. I hand it off, and it then becomes available to the IU community through the knowledge base.
Chris, you brought up a good point there. As a service owner, there's a lot of things you have to be concerned with, right? The fully function of the service, how well the customer is perceiving the value of the service. Is the service being utilized as you would have expected? And knowledge can oftentimes kind of get shuffled to the back burner. But I think, back to Megan's question, how do you turn around? How do you turn those things around? You can't wait for perfection, right? You have to, and like Mary Frances said, you've got to make it easy for people to share knowledge. You also have to celebrate that knowledge is being shared. So when people do share their knowledge and you recognize them for their contributions and you make a big deal out of it. It's not so, oh, thank you for writing your 10 knowledge articles this month. First of all, that's the wrong measure. But then secondly, celebrate when someone shares their knowledge and to the point there, don't wait for perfection. Just get it written down. There are folks that have that talent to make it consumable and readable and all those kind of things. But really approach it like continual improvement. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time. Just get it out there and then get the feedback from your audience about where to improve. And then not only recognize that you're getting the feedback, but recognize the folks that are sharing that knowledge. And I think that can be very helpful in getting things turned around or heading in the right direction if knowledge management seems to be struggling a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just add to what Doug said. I mean, having some kind of feedback opportunity is essential as well, especially in the IT world. Things are so complex and moving so fast that it's very easy for a service to change before a service owner has necessarily updated the documentation on it. So perhaps a user catches that and says, "Oh wait, this part of the article needs updating," and that's part of what we have as well. So I think that's an essential piece.
Yeah, I think that takes us segues us into nicely into the nuts and bolts of knowledge management. There's a discipline you have to instill around creating, using, and sharing that management. So how do we effectively motivate people to do that? I mean, Doug, you talked about recognition and Chris about feedback. Chris, because you guys are deep in this, what can you sketch out the shape of your program, like how you get from identify a need, see a need, fill a need, as robots would say. You know, how do you say, I need an article on this, we write it, we get the feedback cycle going, and then iterate?
Well, I mean, once you have a culture of knowledge management, then service owners, by and large, want to create the documentation. And I'm not saying it's flawless because everybody's so busy. You know, sometimes things will get missed, but the feedback loop can help catch that when things do get missed. So I think those two things kind of go hand in glove to address what you were talking about, Megan.
Mm-hmm. Oh, go ahead, Mary Frances.
I was going to say, I'll add to that, not having too much complexity. You know, another thing that has come out with COVID for a number of organizations, perhaps previously, you know, information, a policy, something was changed. There was then typically these, you know, steps to the distribution of that information. And with COVID, it brought forth, like, sometimes information is moving so quickly that we don't have time to change it at this level, distribute it to a middle level, and then bring it to our students or our audience. We've got to learn to, you know, have more of a singular step and the information be transferred to everyone at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I think there's definitely some benefits in evaluating, you know, all the different steps or complexities that perhaps you put in that knowledge transfer, that sometimes organizations are putting in too many steps, which can certainly delay things and also make things more complicated.
Sure. Process for the sake of process.
Exactly. Check the box.
I think that's an excellent point. I think it also does point out the advantage of having a dedicated information management team, because they can navigate some of that stuff, which service owners don't even necessarily have time to navigate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And in your organization, Chris, how do you guys identify what that need is? Are you using feedback are you mining for common problems from your service management systems, or are students and faculty suggesting solutions that might be needed? How is that mediated?
Well, we get feedback from users. Our subject matter experts, and service owners try to be proactive. We have a process to systematically check in with the owners of particular documents on a regular basis to make sure that, those documents are current and up to date. But the other thing I was going to say is a key piece of this is the change management process that we have, because if everybody comes together everybody does come together in a weekly meeting and shares, the big system changes that are coming up, then if anything has fallen through the cracks up to that point, someone from my knowledge management team is there and, they say, okay, are we making sure the documentation is up to date and supporting this?
Mm-hmm. I know we'll come back to this when we talk about technology, but you'd mentioned you guys are using a certain amount of AI listening, right? To really hone in on what the right answer is to a question in your system?
Well, yes and no. Our chatbot, yes. We'll be moving into talking about that. We're using the Ivy.ai chatbot, which is taking information from the knowledge base, which is what I've been talking about so far. The knowledge base itself is maintained by the professional knowledge management team, and they interact with the service owners, the subject matter experts, but also, look at feedback coming in from users that might say, there's something wrong in this article and things like that. Mm-hmm. And they'll vet that and make sure. Sometimes somebody will think it's a mistake and it really isn't, but sometimes it is. And then it gets fixed.
Sometimes it's wrong, but it's intentionally wrong. Designed that way. Yeah. You touched on something like a professional knowledge management team. And Doug, I wanted to get you to weigh in on training. There is a discipline around knowledge management. How critical is it that you follow one of the prescribed methodologies, like say KCS, versus kind of leaning into the spirit of knowledge management, and how important is training in that regard?
Yeah, let me go backwards on that question. Everybody has good intentions when it comes to knowledge and documenting knowledge, perhaps, right? But I'll document it one way, and Mary Frances does it a different way, and then Chris has another perspective, and then what we wind up with is a bunch of gobbledygook that we can't make head or tail of, right? And the other thing that we have to recognize is that there are going to be different audiences for knowledge. If I'm just a student or a user, and I don't mean it just, but if I'm a student or a user of knowledge, I have a different level of expectation with respect to what I want to consume from knowledge than perhaps some of my senior technical folks would have of knowledge. So this is where the training comes into play. How do we do things in a way that is simple enough with just enough process, but yet delivers the value that we have to have out of a knowledge management approach? And this is where methodologies like KCS become so powerful. The folks on the front line are dealing with this every day. And rapidly, the chatbots are starting to deal with this every day. And there ought to be a way that we can, capture and listen to what we're being asked to do, respond to those things as it makes sense. And if we recognize, hey, I think I know what to do, but I'm not quite sure. KCS, for example, gives you a methodology for having that knowledge reviewed, but yet available to the right audience at the right level. So this is where training and just becoming aware of what you can do and should do with knowledge management becomes critical, because otherwise I'm putting it in SharePoint, Mary Frances has got it over in some wiki somewhere, and Chris has got his big, nice technical manual that looks great, but we still can't get to it. And it's just wasted effort at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, on the subject of process, I'm going to put out another poll real quick. Again, it'll be open for a minute. This one in particular is on whether your organization currently has a knowledge management program or a structured process. So the poll's going to start now, and your options are: yes, we have one; not yet, but we're going to kick off an initiative this year; and no, we don't have one. So I'll give you guys a minute to answer there. And while you consider those responses, Mary Frances, I did want to get your thoughts on, to Doug's point. It is, more common than I think some people would acknowledge, to have that scattered knowledge all over the place in a book, on a wiki, in SharePoint. Where can AI and automation lighten that knowledge load, lighten the process load? What are the really kind of marquee benefits? What are the potential risks?
Sure. So on that note of the content, the information being in multiple places, that is absolutely a benefit of AI, is bringing all those pieces of content and knowledge together. Oftentimes we talk with folks about, what does your bot know? And then where does your bot live? And those may not be the same thing, the same place. Often a challenge is that, your clients, the folks that you're serving, they are in one place, but the information that they're seeking lives in a different place. So how do we take that information that lives in the different place and bring it to where our customers are? So that's a key component. In addition to that, I would consider it a bit more of a simplified level. All of those tier 1 automated processes that are truly just taking a bunch of your team's time. And hand over fist, we hear folks talk about, I have this highly educated, phenomenally skilled team, and yet they're changing passwords 75% of the time. They're literally hitting a button to do a password reset. That is not, capitalizing on their skill sets. So how can we automate those things so that we can then capitalize on truly the skill sets of the people that we've hired to then move our business forward even further? And we'll talk soon about then the kinds of data that the AI gleams. I think Chris and Doug were both starting to brush on that a little bit around how you start to get into more of the why. Why do they have questions? Is there something wrong with this article? Is it the information was not in the right place? You then start to have data that allows you to strategically move forward to provide better service, which prior to AI, most folks don't have. You can say we have this volume of tickets, we have this volume of phone calls, but you don't necessarily understand why did we have this many tickets. So that brings it to another place. When we think about the risks, Megan, and I know that Chris can speak to this because we've talked about it before, really the number one risk goes back to people. And what I mean by that is, again, this is not magic. This is a tool within your overall strategy, within your overall toolbox to help you drive things forward. So people understanding out the gate that on day one, it's not going to be perfect. And then where they can come in to continue to drive it forward is really key. But that, I would say, from the sake of risk, is definitely at the top. Ensuring your team doesn't think it's magic.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll come back to that in a hot second, but the results of our poll say that 61% of the audience, they do have a knowledge management process, some sort of structured program in place. About 20% are planning to kick one off this year, and about 17% don't have one at all. So getting back to our previous question, Mary Frances indicates that you've got some experience and you've had some discussions about the risks and rewards of automation. Chris, do you want to speak to that?
Yes, yeah, what Mary Frances is alluding to is actually like the biggest concern I had in rolling this out at IU, because as she said, and I totally agree, AI is not magic. When it works well, it can actually seem like magic, and that's why people get tricked. When it works well, it's so satisfying that then you're like, well, then why aren't you working well when you're asking other questions? But the truth of the matter is all AI systems just need massive amounts of data to work well. So it needs to see the same question worded, 15 or 20 different ways before the bot sort of develops the algorithmic pattern to recognize the underlying question and be able to answer it in a reliable way. We have over 6,000 intents in our Ivy chatbot now, which, if you do the math, means we need to get about 100,000 questions asked for it to really kind of start to, get its feet under itself. So we're really trying to communicate with the user community. Please try the bot and help it learn, but be patient, because it is learning and it's going to get some things wrong sometimes, but it is going to get better over time. We've seen that already. That's just the way this technology works. And as long as people really understand that, I think they could be patient. And as long as you don't make the bot an obstacle, like our bot is set up so that if you're not getting the answer you want, you can immediately connect with a live agent right from the bot. So there's no reason to just, feel like you're banging your head against the wall. I think that's really important. But it's also really important that people understand what it can do and what it can't do, today, because it isn't magic and it's not reading your mind. It's just processing huge amounts of data that makes it work.
So time is the magic.
Yep.
in that,
that's very true. I think you muted, Megan.
Apologies, my phone is ringing. I'm sorry.
No problem.
Turn that off. Apologies, everyone. I forget I have a landline most days. So time is a critical element in that process, right? Just getting the time with the tool to have it see enough questions. Is there any more structured process when you're looking at training a chatbot? Is there some prescribed path people ought to be following, or is it kind of really organic and it just has to happen the way it's going to happen?
Well, I would say for me, I'm really, versed in the Ivy.ai product. So I don't want to generalize too much, but the way Ivy works, they have staff on their end who are taking questions that did not get answered well and sort of remapping them. And then the bot is training on that. So that really kind of is the process. There's definitely a clearly defined process. And if the staff can't figure out the correct answer to a question, they push it over to us, because we have more knowledge of the technology arena at IU, of course. So then we can take care of those questions. So that's the process within Ivy. I'm sure other chatbot and AI products work differently. I can't imagine it not having some sort of process, though, because there needs to be some degree of information management and auditing of how accurate accurately the thing is doing things. I mean, this is just a personal sense of things. There's no AI system in the world right now that is 100% perfect at understanding language from an algorithmic point of view. And that's why there does need to be some kind of human intervention, I believe, in any sort of bot space.
Mary Frances, do you guys recommend a process or a series of milestones? One of the members of the audience asked, is there a certain number of tickets, a certain volume you reach where using AI and chatbots is more beneficial and the cost trade-off is worth it? So is there a place that people should expect a milestone they're going to hit now? This is where it's going to be truly valuable, and here I can begin the process, or is it, a little bit more flexible?
I think it squarely depends on your business and what you're seeking to drive forward. What are your initiatives? What are your objectives with your current budget and the current experience you're bringing to your customers? Do you have a net promoter score that you're satisfied with? Where are your gaps? What is ultimately the problem you're trying to solve? And as you think about that problem you're trying to solve, like I said, all those things that I just described might look great and you're within your budget and your business is going well, but then you realize, you know what? We have no after hours and weekend strategy or support. We're not bringing that forth for our customers. Maybe that's why you want to move forward first. So there's definitely different components as to what would force you to raise your hand. The other thing, as Chris was talking about, there's no training data out there that brings you to a perfect place on day one. He and I are obviously completely aligned on that. The other thing, though, that I'll throw in there that I think continues to be very, very enlightening for customers is, we, as Doug was describing earlier, maybe Doug calls something A and I, as the customer, refer to it as B, and Chris, as another customer, calls it a C. If you've only framed it within your knowledge base or within your self-serve wiki as A, then Mary Frances and Chris may not find that answer, may not be able to get to that answer. So that's really, and Chris can certainly share some data that they've been looking at IU around, the benefits for the end user in using natural language processing and in building this training data versus just using some form of a search function, and how that really brings forth a different user experience. And I know when we all had some previous conversations, I always like to say, Alexa and Siri were not perfect on day one, but we all continued to ask them questions because we wanted them to be perfect. And, look how much better they are now than they were 3, 4, 5 years ago. That's how we get to where we want to go, is to keep asking those questions.
Siri knows me better than I know myself sometimes. Yes.
Sometimes she pops up in the most inopportune times, too.
Doug, you're on mute.
I didn't say Siri,
Right.
What are you talking to me for? Yeah, anyway.
Alexa too, they're always watching. So did you want to speak to some of the data that you have collected on your
Sure. Yeah, I think, one of the key things is to see that there literally are an infinite number of ways of asking the same question. But if the bot sees enough of these variations, it's able to recognize A, B, and C, as Mary Frances described them. All are really asking the same thing, and that's really important. And it's an advantage of having a machine doing this, because when you're a human being behind a knowledge base, you're trying to predict all the search terms that people would come up with. But, I never would have thought of this crazy search term that Mary Frances used. Yeah, seriously. I mean, there's just no way you can predict all of the different ways that people might, express the thing that they're looking for. So that's where I think natural language processing becomes a huge advantage.
And that goes back, Megan, to what we talked about earlier with at some point you need to jump off the cliff, because your audience is going to bring you the best training data. And so nothing is going to be perfect on day one. It's always funny. We see teams will do testing, and then when they launch the bot and they start to actually see the way their audience asks the questions, they're like, oh, they don't have that data prior to having a bot. Now they truly see what were those search terms. How are people wanting to find this information?
Mm-hmm. Well, it has often been said, and it will be true forever, that perfect is the enemy of done and perfect is the enemy of good. And you're right. Sometimes you just have to start. And I think that that's helped us get to this answer on what are some of the reasons why knowledge management programs might falter. I think we've hit on, the expectation that it's magic. If your expectation is misset, then you're going to be disappointed. That notion of the time that it takes. So if you're not giving it enough time, if you're not giving enough inputs, what else might people run into on this journey of automating knowledge management?
I will say sorry, just for us, the knowledge base that we have is for technology support at Indiana University. So the bot is to answer questions related to technology support at Indiana University. But once people are starting to get their questions answered around that, then they start asking questions about anything. It's like, when is the concert tonight at the music school? It's like, stupid bot, and it's like, well, no, it never had the information in the first place, so it couldn't answer that question. But I think it does give a signal that, again, this sort of sense of magic that's there. If you could kind of have an enterprise bot that was aware of all things Indiana University, people would love that. But that's not where we are right now. So part of it for us is it's really important to set those expectations appropriately.
Do you have a plan on your roadmap to start expanding your universe of answers to address more enterprise-wide?
As of today, honestly, no, we don't. We really want to get working well what we've got right now, and then, but I could see that as a possibility. Yeah.
But in the short term, they won't know where that concert's going to be.
Right. Yeah.
Doug, anything you can think of to add as a possible obstacle?
Well, I think
you're on mute, Doug.
I think you brought up a great question. And the technology is there, and we can literally do about anything that we can imagine when it comes to this kind of stuff. But the thing that comes back over and over in the conversations that I have with some of my clients is, what's your strategy? I mean, Chris just mentioned we want to get this working well for technology supported IU before we go elsewhere with this. It could be very tempting to say, well, this could handle anything from getting tickets to the ball game and up to concert at the music school to where do I register for classes next semester. And just not having that strategy, can get you in trouble because tools can do about anything, and you can pay about as much money. No offense, Mary Frances, but you can pay about as much money as you want for any kind of technology. And then the other side of that question is, why are we doing this? And we touched on this a little bit earlier. Is it because we want to be seen as a leading knowledge management organization? Is it because our clients like us to have this kind of technology? What is the why behind it? And last but not least, one of the biggest things that I hear, when the knowledge management initiative kind of falters, is it becomes more work. It has to be part of the day-to-day job. It can't be interpreted as more work. It's part of what I do, and it's a part of my valuable deliverable. When we just say, in addition to work, that's when people get turned off and they don't want to participate, and we don't ask the bot enough questions, and we don't get enough data over it, so on and so forth. So those are the kind of the three big things that I see where knowledge management kind of falters or falls off the rails.
Mm-hmm. We'll definitely come back to strategy. But in terms of technologies, if we shift to technology here, over the past, let's say 2 years, in addition to chatbots and the acceleration of engagement with that technology, how else has the technology for enabling knowledge management evolved? What's available today, for instance, that wasn't available 2 years ago? Mary Frances, I know you have a view of that landscape.
Yeah, there's a number of things actually, Megan. So one around, access to information there's an expectation that it's omni-channel, that you should be able to access information from any channel at any given day or time from any location. With that, we're definitely starting to see a shift across a number of industries. Some folks may remember there's been industries where there's been a focus of mobile first. We're starting to see folks make, there's the digital front door when you think about the healthcare space. We're starting to see where folks see that they need this unified journey, kind of as Chris was just describing, for the entire life cycle. And so instead of looking and creating strategies around just an individual channel and their individual knowledge, it's looking at, bot first, and then what are our pathways of escalation, whether that be, deflection from a phone to the bot, bots managing email and then routing to a live human. So a lot of technology focus on omni-channel, 24/7, 365. Also, companies beginning, we keep talking today about the data. So things are becoming more mature. And so companies should be able to offer default training data. We're an organization that doesn't have a knowledge-based culture, that doesn't currently have a knowledge base. Can you help us? Where do we get started? Where's that baseline cliff that we jump off of? So companies are starting to be able, within the industries that they focus in, to be able to say, this is your bucket. You need an answer to all of these questions on day one as a decent starting place. The next part is around what Chris was describing in regards to process and technology to identify the gaps. So within even just your own, area of information, where are there gaps? People are asking questions about X and there's, not an answer to those. Putting those in front of the IU team to say, hey, do you want to add an answer to these questions or do you not? And then lastly, in regards to technology that is displaying and really translating for the organizations how to use the data. So when you start to learn the why and see the why and identify patterns, what do you then do with it? Does it mean, you're changing your structure of your team? Does it mean you're doing outbound things at a certain time of year? Does it mean you're adjusting your content? So those are really the main 4 areas, Megan, that we're starting to see things mature and become more sophisticated.
And Doug, are you seeing that with the clients you work with?
Yeah, I'm nodding my head as Mary Frances is describing what she's seeing. I remember when I first got introduced to some commercial bots, gosh, it's probably been 3 or 4 years ago at an HDI conference, and just to see the advances and primarily where it's advanced. I mean, the early chatbots was I go look up a knowledge article, and if I see these key terms, then I'll answer your question. If I don't, I'll just kind of, sorry, can't really help you, and here's the help desk number, and that's okay. That was a place to start. But the big things that I'm seeing is homogenized data, as Mary Frances was alluding to. We all have Windows 10, we all have Google Docs, we all have common technologies, and we can tap into that what I call homogenized data. Everybody has Windows 10 problem, and here's the answers, and they're actually fairly robust answers. The biggest advances that I have seen is now, and this technology has been there, but now it's starting to merge where we have a chat bot that is supported by machine learning, that has a robust natural language processing behind it, can do natural language understanding. We've come light years in just a very short amount of time. And so we avoid that problem that we were talking about earlier. A means C and also means B, that we talked about earlier. That's the biggest thing that I see, and and it just further drives. Okay, now we can focus on capturing the knowledge that makes sense for our organization. We can buy ourselves some time. We can quit resetting passwords so we can actually work on the knowledge that we need that's specific to us, and let the bot learn that A equals B equals C through its mechanisms. We just need to focus on getting good knowledge out there.
Chris, and from your perspective, you sit on the side where you're going to implement solutions that would optimize your overall operation. What are you looking at on the horizon?
Well, I think to just echo what Mary Frances and Doug both said, it's the natural language processing evolving and improving so quickly that that is, I think, the key to making all this really viable now, whereas it might not have been, 5 or 10 years ago. And I foresee that continue to happen. I see it continuing to get better. It is interesting in the early days of a bot, you could see, it answers one question perfectly and one slight variation of it. It's like it doesn't have any idea what's going on. And you're like, come on, But I think that those things are just going to get better and better with time as our computational language models improve.
How are you looking to evolve from where you are today? Do you have specific plans on your roadmap that you can share?
Well, no, I really don't. I could share with you like my own personal vision, but that's doesn't have anything to do with IUs necessarily. But I think the key thing, like I said, is we really want to get this one that we have right. I think when you have a bot that really is working and really is thorough and understanding a whole range of questions, then you prove that it can be done, and then it's useful in all kinds of applications. And I think that's when you start to get interest in wider adoption, because until you have that, it's like a really, really cool idea, but we want it to be actually a really, really cool service.
And really, really smart service. And I think we've touched on a lot of that throughout the conversation, what it takes to make it smart. And it's not necessarily a hard and fast equation, but it's not magic either. So,
right.
And
it's data. It's data.
Yeah, it's data. Yeah. The other thing you mentioned in threes was strategy when we were prepping for this call. So, we talked a bit about when knowledge management initiatives falter, what can that tie back to? And, yesterday you mentioned that it's really strategy. So for you, Chris, what was your experience of creating this strategy for IU?
Well, I wouldn't say I created the strategy. I advocated for the bot as an extension of the overall information and presentation strategy. But as I said, I'm fortunate that in the current position I'm in, I inherited a knowledge management team that is excellent, but also already has great traction at Indiana University. So, we have a knowledge management, information management culture, and people who value that. So what we're doing really with the bot is extending that, trying to make the services just easier to access, a more friendly conversational approach, but also using natural language processing so that it can understand this wide variety of ways people can ask the same question, and that all those questions mean the same thing, which is much harder to get in a conventional search.
So, as you noted, you advocated for it. So if other members of our audience are in the position of advocating for automation, for maybe a more robust knowledge management program, what are some best practices, tips you guys can give them for convincing leadership, for making that case successfully? And Mary Frances, did you want to start off?
Yeah, I think the thing that needs to be evaluated a lot of times when we were, whether, like I said, it be with a higher ed institution or a healthcare institution, and they're seeking to go down this cultural path. And sometimes the IT group will say, well, we see that we need this at our organization as a piece of technology. Where do you recommend we get started? Really, what we advise these folks to think about is overall at your organization, what are your current pain points? What are your current initiatives? At some places, it's going to be showing revenue. So, where is there an initiative that puts the bot in place of driving revenue? In other cases, it's showing an ROI around metrics like reduced tickets, reduced phone calls. So really, that's where we talk with them, Megan, to say, when you look at your leadership, what's going to get your leadership excited? Is it a revenue generation? Is it a cost savings? Because leadership team to leadership team, different things are driving their strategic goals.
Sounds like a business case to me, Mary Frances, and that's always my answer. How do you get your leadership, or how do you get your senior management involved? And you've got to make that strong business case. The business case for Chris may be radically different than the business case for someone else. Doesn't make, there's no perfect solution other than you have to articulate, what is this going to return to your organization? What should you expect? What kind of an investment is it going to mean? And then what's a horizon for actually when we start to see some benefit of this? We have to set that right expectation. In my experience, there's no shortcut. You've got to write your business cases, and you've got to go pitch them to folks that make decisions and get their feedback. So not every business case is approved, and those are learning opportunities. But when you align those with the outcomes that the organization needs to have, drive more revenue, provide higher levels of coverage, not increase our staff, but yet provide better service, those are strong, compelling reasons to do it. And the only way you're going to get buy-in on that is get your senior managers and senior leaders involved and get them to commit to it. Business case is the way.
I wholeheartedly agree. Go ahead, Chris. Sorry,
I was just going to add just one other business case. I certainly agree with everything Mary Frances and Doug said, but I think when you have some really good technical folks on your help desk who are continually helping people with things that they could do themselves, reset their passphrase and things like that, it's taking away the time that they could be spending on more complex problems and giving better service to users. And I think users actually would prefer to solve problems on their own when they can. So it's really a win-win for everybody. In that the people who have more complex problems will get better service if those folks have more time to spend with them.
Yeah, and I think with that, Chris, you actually just answered one of the audience questions, which was, do you need to sell it on the level of lowering costs when you are, in fact, probably going to have to build a team or implement a solution? Can you just sell it as better customer service? But to your point, you can tie it back to that.
Yes, I would say absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, Doug, your point about the business case connects to something you said earlier, and Mary Frances, you said about, Doug, you had mentioned you do this when you feel the pain, and the business case helps you catalog, here were our pain points, and here's where we felt it. And it strengthens the case overall. Yeah. So we're winding down to the last about 3 minutes. And so I want to do a round robin before we wrap up with one quick prediction from each of you on 2 subjects. So first up, what's next for AI and automation? Mary Frances.
Next for AI and automation is more complexity in regards to the types of questions that the AI can answer. So it's the foundation of our conversation today. The bigger the training data becomes, someone gets to ask 3 questions in 1 question, and the bot will be able to navigate that. That is absolutely on the horizon.
Chris.
Yeah, I was going to say essentially what Mary Frances said, which is I think it's just the ability of the machine to understand language is going to continually improve, and then it will be able to handle more complex questions than it can today.
Doug.
I think it's going to be making the complex simple. I think we're going to start to get to that finally mythical single pane of glass that we've been chasing for years in IT. I think we're right there.
All right. So then last bit of prognostication and prophecy. What's next for knowledge management? Doug, you're up.
Oh, gosh. The bots are getting to the point now with their capability, they can write their own knowledge articles. And but that doesn't mean that they can do it without adult supervision. So I see this thing called a bot wrangler. Right? That's the new job title. It's going to be the bot wrangler. That role that can explain, train what the bot is doing, and let the bot start to, they're handling that first call. Then hey, let them write the article too. Great.
Okay, Chris.
I think it's just also continually in the knowledge management systems to make the information that they contain more and more accessible so they can be consumed in a wider variety of endpoints.
And last but not least, Mary Frances.
And I'll take what Doug and Chris said, and then I envision it as a circle. So ultimately closing that loop as they were just describing. And so now the bot identifies your gaps, and then the bot wrangler, as they're putting together, fulfilling that in the bot, it's creating the new knowledge-based article. So that ultimate goal of this true circle that we have is the direction that I see us going.
Fantastic. Well, we're coming to the top of the hour, and I think we've had a great conversation about the future of knowledge management, the future of automation, and their future together. This is all we have time for today. So thank you to everyone in the audience who joined us and participated in today's discussion. I'd also like to thank Doug and Chris and Mary Frances for our lively session. And again, thank you to AI for sponsoring the discussion. So I hope everyone has a great day, and I hope you join us again next month. Bye.
Thank you.